Hello friends and welcome back to Broken BJJ. I'm Kenny and today I want to talk a little bit about diabetes and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This year marks the 30th anniversary. November this year will be 30 years since I was diagnosed with diabetes, and something happened this week at training that just made me want to mention it. I'm quite lucky in a lot of ways. I don't have a lot of complications from my diabetes. The one that I do have is, of course, recently I had 2 frozen shoulders. Those are much more common in people with diabetes than people without. Can happen to anybody, but it's just a lot more common for us. But my eyes are in good condition. My kidneys are in fairly good condition. My feet, my nerves in my feet and my other extremities are still in pretty good condition. So generally speaking, I've been very lucky. I know a lot of people who have been less lucky. And before I go on to anything else, I do just want to say a couple of things about diabetes generally. I have type 1 diabetes. Type 1 is not the same as type 2. Type 2 is more common in older people, and it has a lot of lifestyle factors associated with it, particularly being overweight. Type 1, basically we don't know exactly what triggers it. So if you know somebody who has diabetes, especially if you meet a young person, a child, a teenager, who's just recently been diagnosed, please don't tell them that it's because they ate too many sweeties. That is not true, and it's really, really hurtful to a kid who's just been told that they're going to have this condition for the rest of their life that's probably going to shorten their life, probably going to damage them, make them have a lot of misery later in life with some of those complications that are possible, if not likely. And, you know, they have to deal with a lot of other problems every day for the rest of their lives. So just don't do that. But diabetes is controlled, of course, with insulin and with diet. There's a balance between the amount of insulin you take and the amount of carbohydrate that you take into your body. Normally that's completely self-regulated. Your pancreas produces the insulin as you eat, and that's fine. That works for most people. With me, with other people with diabetes, that doesn't happen. So we have to calculate the amount of carbohydrate we're taking in, calculate the ratio of insulin to carbohydrate, and inject regularly. I inject once with every meal plus 2. I have a long-acting insulin that I take morning and evening, and a shorter-acting one that I take when I eat. So there's a process you go through to learn how to do that, and that's fairly straightforward most of the time. However, when you get into exercise, it becomes a lot more complicated. And I'm sure if I'm speaking to people who have diabetes, they will know all this already and are thinking, well, when are you going to get to talking about how to deal with BJJ? This is what I'm coming to. This week at training, I had kind of a confusing experience, and one that I'm sure some people with diabetes will know all about. I was training, working quite hard, and instead of what you might expect, where exercise would bring your blood sugar down because you're burning all that energy, my blood sugar instead shot very, very high. It went up to 18, which if you are using the American system of measuring blood glucose, that's about 330, which is very high. It's almost as high as my blood sugar was the day that I was diagnosed, when I hadn't had any insulin in my system for months at that point. So that's a difficult thing to deal with. And there are a number of things going on there. One is that anaerobic exercise tends to push your blood sugar up. Sprinters experience this quite a lot. There are a number of sprinters who have to take extra insulin before a race because the buildup of adrenaline and then the sudden, you know, exertion of a huge amount of energy pushes their blood sugar up very high. And obviously you don't want that when you're performing, because to try and describe it, high blood sugar feels like there's syrup in your veins. You feel very, very heavy, very just sticky, really. It makes you very tired. It makes can make your brain kind of sluggish. Can give you headaches and nausea, and a very, very dry mouth. Your body sends all the fluid it can to try and dilute the sugar and then flush it out of the body as urine and or sweat. So there's a thing that happens with anaerobic exercise where that happens. On the other hand, aerobic exercise, if you go on a long walk, or if you go on if you jog, if you do anything that's kind of steady, not huge kind of bursts of strength, but just a steady burning of calories, burning of energy, then your blood sugar will tend to come down. The problem with BJJ, of course, is that before you go to a class, you don't necessarily know exactly how that's going to balance out. Rolling, for example, tends to be quite aerobic. There's a lot of movement, but not necessarily a lot of big explosive movements. Whereas in technique classes, I find, because you're just doing one or two movements and then stopping, and also because you're learning something new, you're putting more strength, putting more energy into those things than you would just using a technique that you're familiar with, where you know where the points of leverage are, and you don't need to expend so much energy in one go. So this happened. I felt very sick, very tired. My throat was unbelievably dry. I felt really, really terrible. And I've been trying to work out what to do about that, because there are so many complicating factors. If I take more insulin beforehand, there's a chance that my blood sugar will crash before it starts to spike. And there's also the possibility that maybe we're doing a technique that doesn't require so much energy, and then there's an excess of insulin. Perhaps it's a more aerobic type of exercise that we're doing when learning a technique, and you then end up with your blood sugar crashing. And that's really problematic as well. You have what's called a hypoglycemic episode. You need to get some sugar back into your body, and then it's 15 minutes or so before your blood sugar comes back up to a normal level where it's safe for you to go back and train. I mean, the last thing you want to do is be training with someone, have someone's physical safety in your hands when your blood sugar is that low. With hypos, you get confused. You generally become very kind of sweaty and anxious. There's an adrenaline rush that comes with it. So you become shaky, your muscles lose a bit of control. If it gets too serious, you can actually seize, and all your muscles will tense up, and you essentially have a seizure. That's quite uncommon. That you have to be almost at the point of losing consciousness for that to happen. But you don't want it to happen during training. So that's something that you have to consider. I'm not really sure that I have advice here, just some kind of thoughts about it. I think people who have diabetes shouldn't certainly shouldn't be afraid of training. Training is great. It's great for your fitness. And even, you know, if you have quite severe complications of various kinds, whether that is something like an amputation, which, you know, diabetes is one of the most common reasons for amputations, because you can damage if the blood vessels in your feet get damaged by just an excess of sugar getting stuck inside them. Those blood vessels die off, the nerves then die off, and then damage to your feet can quickly develop into things like gangrene. It's less common these days than it was in years gone by, but it is still a significant factor that people have to think about. Same with blindness. You know, one of the leading causes of blindness is diabetes, because again, those small blood vessels in the back of your eye get choked up with excess sugar, and that kills off the nerves in your retina, and you stop being able to see. So as I said before, I've been very lucky, but with those things, you know, people with one leg can do very well in jiu-jitsu. I mentioned before, there's a guy in my gym who only has one leg. That actually was the result of an accident, but it could just as easily be from something diabetes related. And there are ways that you can adapt your jiu-jitsu to suit. The same with blindness. There are times I actually sometimes try just closing my eyes during training, just so that I know more about what I'm feeling. If you close your eyes during training, you can sometimes get a feel for a move that you don't get if you're trying to work out where your hands and your feet should be just from looking. So don't let your diabetes put you off training. There's certainly no reason for that, but it does obviously add some complications. If you've never done exercise that intensive, then it's a different kind of experience. You know, I think people who take up jiu-jitsu, with even people who are fit and healthy, find that getting into jiu-jitsu requires a whole different kind of fitness. You're using muscles that you don't necessarily use in that way, and often you're using them in a way that you don't use them. There's just a whole kind of physical vocabulary around jiu-jitsu that is very, very new to people, and it's exhausting in a way that lots of other kinds of exercises aren't. But of course, getting fit, exercising is very good for your control overall. It is just being healthier, being fitter is better for you if you're diabetic. So I would encourage you to take it up, but your diabetes is not my diabetes. You have to figure some of these things out. Some of the things I would suggest are obviously talk to your doctor, your specialist nurse, your dietitian. All of these things should be available to you at your clinic if you're in the NHS. If you're in another country, you know, maybe you have a slightly different setup, but that kind of expertise should hopefully still be available to you. I would strongly recommend you talk to them about it and explain to them, you know, just what is involved in jiu-jitsu training to get their advice. What I noticed before the lockdown of the last 15 months or so, one of the things that I noticed was that after a few months there was a shift, and the amount of insulin I needed and the amount of exercise, the amount that the exercise affected me changed. There's kind of a point where I think your body just gets used to a new routine and adjusts, and I think I've not got to that point again since I went back a couple of weeks ago. So I need to look into that. I need to just keep an eye on what's happening. But yeah, monitor your blood sugar closely. If you have a sensor on your arm, like one of these, that is incredibly helpful, because you can watch the minute by minute of what happens to your blood sugar during a session. I think it is usually worth taking a small amount of insulin before you train, but being prepared for the fact that when you start rolling, your blood sugar will very often start to drop quite precipitously. So even if you're having to stop and do some finger prick tests, do that. Figure out what's happening to you, and adjust as you need to. There's a thing that a lot of people will have done called the Daphne course, the dose adjustment for normal eating. And there are rules in there for how to prepare for exercise. Those are very useful. Read up on those if you can, even if you've not done the actual Daphne course. I would recommend you can Google and find some of those details, and have a look at those, see how they apply to you. As I said, it's your diabetes and you have to figure out how it works best for you. But in my circumstances, I find a little bit of insulin just before class starts helps to prevent that big spike. And I then have a bag of jelly babies, and I'll have a few of those during the class, or as we get into rolling at the end of the class, to try and prevent that crash from coming. But in general, I would say give it a go. It's challenging, and jiu-jitsu is fabulous exercise, and it's fabulous intellectual stimulation. So do give it a try. If you're not diabetic and you experience this, then please just be aware of your training partners if they do have diabetes. Learn the symptoms of a hypo. Learn to look out for that. If somebody starts sweating unusually profusely, if somebody seems to suddenly lose muscle tone while you're grappling with them, if somebody starts saying things that sound a bit weird, because you can also lose a bit of verbal dexterity if your blood sugar is very low. Look out for those kinds of things, and please, and understand, you know, if somebody says, sorry, my blood sugar's low, I can't roll right now, understand that they're not doing it as a way out. They are doing it because they don't want to risk their own health or your health by rolling when it's not safe to do so. So do be aware of that, and also, you know, try to be a little bit sympathetic if they say that there's some issue like their blood sugar going high. It's a really unpleasant situation, and it does happen. It certainly happens to me a lot. I've heard other people mention similar things happening to them. So do be conscious of it and try to understand that this is not something that anybody is doing to mess with your training. The person who's suffering most is the person whose blood sugar is a little bit out of control at that point. Again, I'm sure most of you are absolutely fine with that and don't give your training partners a hard time, but there is a certain amount of misunderstanding of diabetes that I kind of mentioned at the beginning of the video, that I think we all as a society need to get past. Diabetes is pretty common, and it's something that is pretty challenging to live with, and very challenging to work with when you're doing really intensive exercise. So do try to be understanding, and coaches as well. If you are a coach and somebody in your class has diabetes, it is worth just trying to learn a little bit about it so that you can be as supportive and as helpful as you can. If you're able to then let people know in advance what kind of techniques they're going to be training at class, how much effort is likely to be involved. You know, if you're going to be training takedowns, for example, then that's a pretty big explosive energy, burst of energy that you're putting in. So maybe mention that to your trainees, so just so that they can prepare a little bit better, have a little bit better idea of what to prepare for. They can adjust their insulin, adjust their food, and hopefully have a better balance to their blood sugar. Because obviously, the better their blood sugar is balanced, the better their training experience is going to be. It's very difficult to train if your blood sugar is high or low. Of course, all the other things that you would think of when it comes to general sort of health and well-being apply too. Eat as well as you can. Don't get too into, you know, refined sugars. Try to have a healthy, balanced diet. Try to sleep well. These things can all make a big difference. And, you know, even be aware of the general effect of exercise on your blood sugar. These things have an effect that goes beyond just the day of training. You can have a kind of hangover effect the next day, and even just a generalized effect across your whole life, where regular exercise, improved fitness, changes the way your diabetes works. It's all a personal experience though, and that's why I'm trying not to give too much advice, too much of my own kind of side of things, because what happens to me is not what will happen to you. Your body is not the same as mine. Your diabetes is not the same as mine. It's your diabetes, and you have to learn to control it your way. Some people will find that, you know, they don't care. There are people that do that don't care very much about it and just plow on regardless. Some people want to be absolutely meticulous about their control, and, you know, something like this will take them a long time and a lot of frustration to get exactly right. But whatever it is, as I say, it's up to you. Take the best advice you can from the medical professionals. Do as much personal research as you can. Spend as much time as you can looking at your results, your test results, over the course of a session, over the course of the day, and over the course of the week as you train. And hopefully, as I say, after a little while, you'll start to get into a routine. Your body will start to adapt. You'll start to learn what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And with a bit of luck, your control will improve. I will say my control has improved since I started training, even allowing for some of these weird ups and downs that training gives me. So yeah, just enjoy your training. Try not to get too hung up on the diabetes. It is a pain, and it's something that does interfere with your life a lot, but it doesn't have to ruin your life. It's just one more thing that you have to think about. And if you do think about it, eventually you have to think about it less. Anyway, that is all I've got for you today. If you have diabetes, or you know someone who does, and you train, then please do let us know what your experience is like down in the comments. I'd be really interested to hear how you manage things like those anaerobic exercise spikes, the hypos, how your training partners and your coaches react to your diabetes. I would love to hear all about that, so do please let us know down in the comments. And also, if you enjoyed listening to this, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. That all helps the channel to grow, and growing the channel helps us get the word out about some of these issues to more people. So please do that for us if you would. But that's all I've got for you today, so thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again next week. And in the meantime, have fun at training.